Smash!
Hey, today we're doing our first episode of the Quar Tractor series. One of the most integral elements of Quar is their great tractors, big steel behemoths of pig iron, wood, and quarrish engineering. And for our first episode, we're going to be tackling the Kaftir and Chyweethl. In this video, you can expect some good lore behind the vehicle itself, we'll go into the fun anecdotes, and you can expect a fun little painting tutorial. Now, I do want to mention, I know some of you had the expectation that I was going to be painting every single tractor in one video, but I want to spread these out just a little bit, as it will be a little while before the next Quar faction focus. But before we get into the video, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you like what you see, share it with a friend, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For just $3 a month, you get to see my videos early, and for $5, you get a weekly Q&A, as well as exclusive streams and roles in the Mishmash Discord. And it just really helps me out overall. This is effectively my job, so I just want to give a huge thank you to my channel members. You guys are amazing. And additionally, if you are interested in purchasing anything related to Quar, you can use my Wargames Atlantic affiliate link down below. Doesn't cost you anything, and it just helps me out. Plus, you can pick up the STL for the Chyweethl on Wargames Atlantic, and if you wish to get the physical version, you can get it at zombiesmith.com. But enough about that. Let's get tucked in, have a moth cake, and let's talk about the Chyweethl. The Chyweethl Light Armored Tractor. The first Chyweethls were actually built in the 1640s. Over the course of 140 years of service, it's seen major revisions and countless smaller revisions over the course of history. The modern version only has a couple things in common with the older renditions, this being the shape and pedrail system. If you're not familiar, pedrails are essentially a cousin to treads, except they're more like rubberized feet. This gives them the advantage of being more accessible to rough terrain and rough roads. However, this system is extremely difficult for the Chyweethl to use on newly paved roads. Travel of just a few miles on pavement will require the replacement of most of the pedrails, and it causes serious damage and wear on the chainrail. The main weaponry of the Chyweethl is an 83mm mounted gun. This gun requires the driver, commander, and gunner to train together constantly, as the limited traversal of the main gun requires the driver to assist in aiming by tweaking the throttles left and right to rotate the tractor. Not exactly efficient, but when you have a bunch of Chyweethls lined up next to each other, they're pretty nice. Chyweethl regiments consist of 5 companies of tractors. Each company contains an HQ of 2 tractors and 2 sections of 8 tractors each. This gives the regiment a total strength of 90 tractors. Along the Great Wall of Kaftir, subgates are usually assigned a company or 2 of Chyweethls, all while the main gates usually have an entire regiment assigned. Before the era of the Crusade, Chyweethls were also organized into breach regiments that were stationed a few kilometers behind the wall, mostly as a means to support areas that were faltering under siege. Nowadays, due to the success of the Crusade itself and the newly designed Paradin, most of these regiments have been broken up and reassigned along the main wall. Once again, the Crusade have been responsible for several of the deaths and destruction of these Chyweethl regiments. There are currently 51 regiments, and this is down from 78. Along with this, Kaftiran manufacturing has slowed down production of the Chyweethl to a trickle. This is in favor of supplying the Common Rifler and Artillery Corps of the Crymuster. Despite being the modern rendition of an old design, the Chyweethl feels like a relic of its time. It isn't terribly efficient, it's clunky, and it requires a lot of core power to actually make this thing work. In a lot of ways, I think this thing is a great reflection of the Kaftiran society as a whole. Their overall attitude, goals, and personality is to give the impression of an older, more civilized era, this being at the cost of efficiency in battle. As a result, the Chyweethl has struggled to keep up with the ever-evolving landscape of the Great War, and to a greater extent, the rise of the Crusade. In fact, the Crusade's more modern technology and tractors left the mechanical core of Kaftir almost non-existent. It got so bad that several of Kaftir's naval crews actually ended up being trained as light tractor crew at the height of the Great Wall's breach. They did pretty well for themselves overall, mostly because they were used to working in tight, loud confines and were generally mechanically inclined. And hell, to their credit, most of these former sailors are now the backbone of the Corps' NCOs and officers. Due to that combination of the Crymuster grit and naval pomp and circumstance, it's transformed the Mechanical Corps into the pride of the Crymuster. Say what you will, this thing is not entirely efficient, and maybe this is just a little bit of my royalist side coping. But this piece of equipment has really led to some great history and great advancements in the Crymuster itself. And it's just a wonderfully unique design. It's so crisp and it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's that nice balance of World War I aesthetic along with such a wonderful touch of whimsy. And I gotta say, of the tractors I've painted so far, it's probably my favorite. Speaking of which, let's get into the actual painting. Now to begin painting my Chyweethl, I zenithal primed it as you can see, and I'm spraying it down using a mixture of 3:1 Celestium blue and Leviathan purple. There are several different designs and color schemes you can go for the Chyweethl. Some of them even have regular green camos, some of them have more teal-like colors, but I wanted to go for a mixture of both the classic blue and the purple designs. The first one I painted is definitely more on the blue side, but I thought going for this deep purple would look all the more alluring. Of course, you don't need an airbrush to apply this, it's just super efficient. And already you can see this is a very stark color, and I'm liking it. Once the main color has time to dry, we're going to go over a light dry brushing of dark blue-gray 1:3 with blue from Acryl. I kind of want to establish this more on the flat surfaces while leaving that dark purplish blue in the recesses. As you can see, the dry brush I'm using is just a classic makeup brush because it allows me to dance over the miniature a little easier and not so harshly. Momentarily we'll go into a more direct dry brushing, but first I want to paint the ped rails. And to do so, I'm going to be applying some Black Legion all over. We'll also be applying this color to the main gun, as well as any little mechanical elements that I want to touch up. This is really all just personal preference. I've seen plenty of Chyweethls that actually have the gun the same color as the main paint, so it's really just up to what you want to do. In a lot of ways, it actually makes sense to use just the black on the ped rails, as they are supposed to be rubberized, but I do like adding a little bit of a metallic finish, and we'll do that later on. Now back to the more direct dry brushing I was alluding to previously. This time I'm using a smaller dry brush or makeup brush just to really establish this color on without getting over the ped rails. You'll notice that I'm basically just kind of sponging this on rather than dry brushing. It's catching on the raised surfaces, but I do also want to create some areas that are more glaring than others. Going in with a more faint application rather than using a regular brush kind of gives the impression that the paint is chipping away and just overall fade on the paint itself from sunlight. But once I was done with that, we can actually get into the freehanding portion of the video. If you don't give a rat's ass about freehand, you can skip ahead. But what we're going to be doing is sketching out the symbol of Koftir, this being the gate symbol. To do so, I'm sketching out the symbol using some Black Legion, and I would argue that if you're painting a tractor, you don't have to be as neat. But to start things out, I'm first sketching an upside-down triangle. It's a relatively simple object to sketch out, especially if you're new to freehand, and don't get discouraged if you mess up. But once our triangle is sketched out, we can then sketch out a trapezoid above the triangle. Essentially, we just kind of sketched out the Superman logo. And if you add a little nodule at the top, you have a perfect base for the Koftir symbol. Now we can get to work on filling in the symbol itself using the silver and goldish colors. For this, I'm using uniform gray on the top portion mixed with a little bit of ghost gray. I'm thinning my paint a little bit, not too much, to give myself a little bit of leeway so it doesn't go runny, and I can allow myself to be a little bit chunkier with the painting itself. I don't really mind, it's a tractor at the end of the day. A little bit of chunky paint doesn't hurt anyone. And if you're new to freehand once again, take a little bit of pride in knowing that I needed to clean this up plenty of times myself to make it look good, especially during the process of evening out both sides. After doing so, we've sketched the top portion. We can clean up using a little bit more Black Legion in preparation for filling in the gold portions. I'd also take the opportunity to kind of sketch up and touch up the top portion. It's a little lopsided, but we can fix that. Now for the gold portion, I'm going to be sketching in the first smaller triangle using a mixture of dark green-brown 1:3 with warm yellow from Acryl. The first triangle is once again an upside down one, and then we can sketch in the diamond for the middle portion. There is going to be plenty of cleanup during this process, so don't worry about it. It's going to be kind of a messy process unless you're really used to freehanding. Once we've sketched in the third symbol, it's already looking pretty damn good. but we'll have to clean up later on to make sure that these colors look balanced as well as not entirely too chunky. Either way, I think this is a good base portion. If you want to stop here, you're totally fine to do so. But my second triangle and the diamond are pretty close together, so I decided to use some satin black to kind of separate each piece, and just to tidy things up a little bit. It ain't a masterpiece, but for a tabletop standard, I'm pretty happy with it. I also use these same colors for the campaign badge. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically just sketching out a tiny Saturn. But in addition to those colors, I would establish a little bit more warm yellow on the symbol on the campaign badge, as well as the symbol of Koftir, just to make things look a little bit more bright and stand out from the main colors. I probably should have gone with a more golden color rather than just yellow, but I'm still happy with it regardless. But once I was happy with that, we're going to be taking another little step in freehand, and for this, I'm going to be going to Rhyfler.com. This is the site where you can find all the rulebooks for Quar itself, and additionally, they have a Quar font you can download. It's essentially a one-to-one with English, so you can just type out whatever kind of signs you want, and you can add them and freehand them to your miniatures. All I gotta do is type it into my notepad, and for simplicity's sake, we're going with Bugnet. In my opinion, the Quar font is very to the point, it's very angular, there's no crazy curves, so that's pretty easy to freehand. And as you can see here, I'm having a good time with it. Especially if you're new to freehand, this is a great little language. It looks goofy, whimsical, and it's just easy on your wrists. Unless you're a goober like me, who decides to give himself no room to paint on the literal 6-letter pattern on the tractor itself. Not sure why I did that to myself, but I still think it looks good. But now that we're done with the freehanding portion of the video, we can get back to the essential details. The reason I put the freehand portion in there is I would suggest doing these portions after doing the freehand. As you can see, I'm now dry brushing the ped rails using a little bit of dark silver from Acryl, and we'll be dry brushing this onto the main armor of the tractor itself. We'll also be adding a little bit more brighter silver to the paint chipping, just to give the metallic a little bit more of a beat-around look. Now for more fun weathering elements, I'm going to be mixing together some black with a little bit of parasite brown from Vallejo. I know there are actual paints like rust streaks for this purpose, but I find that using more acrylic paints is more fun for me to apply. And with this, I can control the amount of orange in the streaks themselves. As you can see, I'm just kind of adding in little pools and little streaks along the miniature, and somewhat feathering this into the recesses where I see fit. You can really go hog wild with it, or you can use it very sparingly. I think a good balance is key when it comes to this. If I go too hog wild with the weathering, it kind of takes away from the miniature overall, especially that nice purplish blue that we've got going on. But that doesn't mean we're not going to have fun with this. After the more liberal application with the detail brush, I decided to use a feathered out dry brush, and I'm going to be watering down the paint significantly and sponging it on to portions of the mini. As you can probably guess, this is to give a much more subtle corrosive element to the paint and the metallic on the mini. Once I was happy with the application, I would go back in with my streaky dry brush using some more bright silver, and I'm just kind of dancing over the mini and feathering it onto the ped rails as well as the more standout portions of the mechanical designs. You don't have to do this portion, it does make the miniature stand out a little bit more, but on the same coin, these are ped rails, not treads. So what you could do is actually use a little bit more Black Legion on the ped rails to kind of return that rubberized look. I didn't go for it, but that's definitely something you can do. But after our first bout of weathering, I'm really happy with how this is looking, but there's one last thing I want to do. I decided to use some European mud from Vallejo FX, and I'm going to be smashing this into the ped rails. I'm actually watering this down just a little bit to kind of feather it into the underside of the chassis itself. And when I apply it on the top portion, you'll see that I went really thick, but I'm going to be slowly watering this down, as the ped rails on the top portion would probably have the least amount of mud. I will say, however, the European mud is definitely a paint that dries and scrunches down over time, so you can go a little bit more thick with it, and it won't look as crazy as it does now while it's still wet. I also splashed this a little bit on the front portion of the tractor, and I splashed it a little bit on the freehand we did. It might seem a little superfluous to splash it on the freehand, but it actually makes it look more tied in with the mini. And while the mud was drying, I decided to add in just an additional little layering of grime, as I decided to use a little bit of crushed up grass from Vallejo FX as well. This just adds in a little bit more realism. It looks nasty, it looks realistic, and it's just fun to apply. Now all we gotta do is let it dry, and we will be left with a wonderfully battered and battle-hardened Chyweethl that's ready to fend off the oncoming onslaught of the Crusader Juggernaut. What a wonderful little model. I could go on and on about how much I love this thing, whether it be its just crisp design or its more mechanical and lore-based design flaws. It's just that perfect balance of appearance and fluff. And honestly, the more I think about it, I can honestly say a lot of the same things about the other tractor designs in Quar, but I think I've definitely flat my beak enough for one video. If you liked what you saw or found it helpful, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kitbash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.